Hello, my name's Sean Lambert, and today we're going to go through some tips and tricks for logistics in Gary Grigsby's War in the East 2. And this is one of the top 5 most requested tips and tricks. The number 1 being the air war, and don't worry, that's coming. This is number probably 2, because logistics are one of those things that you open up the game and it's just like, well, what's going on here? So I thought that a more condensed top 10 list as opposed to a full tutorial on every feature of logistics would be more useful for newer players. The number 1 for me is don't leave rail lines and ports undefended. At the very start of your scenario, you're going to be faced with, Russian units all the way up basically to your front lines. So at the border here. And what you want to make sure is that you clear them out or isolate them in a way such that they can't get forward to any of your ports at any time. And you want to prioritize that even over letting them escape, because just getting your port taken causes damage to it. It causes damage to the rail yard, to the manpower. And all these things take a lot of time to fix. So ports, if they take 100% damage, you're talking like 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 turns, depending on the size of the port. And so look at Riga. This is turn 7 or 8, and it still has just a little bit of damage on it. And that's because I captured it on turn 1 or 2. It takes a long time to get a port fully repaired if you allow your enemy to retake it. And the same goes for rail yards. So this rail yard here is still damaged 41%, even though I took it a good probably on turn 3. So it takes a while even just for a rail yard to get rebuilt. Now, there's only so much you can do about the initial damage to a rail yard. If you build a depot on a hex that does not already have a rail yard in it, so let me find one that is an example where it has a rail yard. So I think Deneau has one built in. So this rail yard here, if I were to capture this hex, let it go all the way down to 0, and then build a depot here, it would just start working immediately. But if I were to build a rail depot on the hex right next to it, it would start 100% damage. You can do it. And it will eventually work, but just be aware that building depots on empty hexes where there's not an existing rail yard does create them at 100% damage. So that's number 1, is always protect your rail lines and always protect your ports, because one of the really dangerous things in a scenario like this, or on the southern front when you're doing those really big dashes forward, or even in the central front where you are trying to clear out the Minsk pocket, make sure that the enemy can't sneak in and take something along your double rail, for example. You don't want to just have some random paratrooper brigade just be able to walk around some of your units and disable your supply system by just walking into it. So just always try to destroy any units that are close enough, or destroy or knock back any units that are close enough to potentially disrupt your supply system. Number 2 is related to number 1, and it is don't leave any railheads without flak protection. And this could mean just stationing your HQ unit on your railhead, which is very normal. Normally you would have an HQ unit on, your frontline railheads. But if you don't have one of those available and you are concerned about it being in range of the enemy bombers, what it might be worth doing is attaching a small unit that has just like a little bit of organic flak, just a little something to dissuade the enemy from trying to bomb it, or at least causing damage when they do try to bomb it. So that's what I would recommend. And if you don't know if you have flak assigned to a unit, you would go to the Assign tab on like a core HQ, and you would check to see if it has anti-aircraft assigned. And in this case, he has 2 anti-aircraft units. The other thing you could do is you could use the map filter for flak. And I when I was learning the game, I heavily used this to understand exactly what was being protected by flak and what wasn't. So if you click on city flak only, this will just show stuff that is directly attached to the city. If you click on all flak, it'll show flak from your units. So you can see here that it's showing the flak from our HQ units and from these divisions. But it is very important to have flak at your railheads to shoot down any planes that try to disrupt it. And that mostly matters when you have, relatively full health railheads. If it's already 100% damaged, don't bother like going out of your way to find a unit to stick on it, other than protecting it from enemy ground units. Because it is a double-edged sword, just because you have flak there, is the unit strong enough to defend against a ground unit if it's in range of a ground unit? So you have to combine 1 and 2 to make sure that you keep your railheads and ports at full health. Number 3 is to keep your Air Force at a lower supply level than your ground units, especially when you're on the advance and you're at the end of your supply line. You can change the supply level by coming to your unit counter. And this is one of the few times that you actually end up needing to use your unit counter for your Air Force. But you click on your Air Force and you'll see that at the beginning, he has a supply priority of 3, which you can set either here or on the right when you click on the unit. What you want to do is to make sure that is lower than your frontline ground units. Now, usually your frontline ground units will probably be a 4, but if for some reason that you're in a situation where you've got a really long front line, a wide front line, and you have some 3s and 2s mixed in there. So like in this case, this I-Corps has a supply priority of 3. So he is the same priority level as the Air Force. And the way you can manage this is either making sure that your frontline units are set to supply priority 4. But the problem there is then you can't prioritize within your groups. So what I would recommend doing, because say you want a different supply priority between I-Corps and your motorized corps here, what I would recommend doing is taking the entire Air Force and bringing it down to a 2 or maybe even a 1, depending on your situation. So you set it much lower, and you will, I think, you'll be happy with the results. This is something I've been playing around with a lot lately, and this allows you to have a little bit more freedom. So you set your Air Force to a 1, and then that gives you 3 tiers for your ground forces. Now, obviously, even if they're at low priority, they are still going to get supply if they're in a good supply area. And the other thing to be aware of is a air unit in low supply is going to suffer higher operational losses. So if you are doing this where you're setting them low supply and you're trying to advance with your ground units, don't fly missions. Just don't fly them. In most parts of the game, your air forces are best used and in a ground support role only anyway. And if you really need the ground support to be breaking through somewhere, then maybe it's worth, for those few turns, bumping up their supply. Just do it in advance. You don't want to do it on the same turn, obviously. Number 4 is don't unnecessarily capture rail while on the advance. And this is why I picked this particular scenario, because it's very important in the Road to Leningrad scenario, Road to Karelia, sorry, that you only capture the rails that you want to repair first. Or at least this is one of the strategies that I have in mind. But what can really slow you down is if you just willy-nilly are capturing every rail from here to Veliky Luki. Because even capturing all of this rail here, although it makes you feel better, look at what this is. This is a lot of red that your units will try to repair. And you'll be constantly having to send them back to HQ to reassign them, or to move your headquarters more forward so that they're going to the right place. But one of the tricks is if you don't capture it in the first place, they can't repair it. So what you can do is you can leave areas uncaptured. So like if you have parts of Lithuania that there's no enemy units in, just don't capture them. They don't matter unless you really need that rail connection between Riga and the coast. You don't even need to capture this area. So I didn't capture this until my supply connection between Pskov and Riga was almost finished, just because I wanted it to, prioritize the road to Riga. So I never captured any of this. Now, if there's an enemy unit in it, eventually you will have to clear them out if they start being annoying. But you can leave them for a good long while. They're not going to do too much as long as they're kind of hemmed in. But if you want to leave an area completely undefended, obviously you probably want to clear them out of there. So that's my biggest piece of advice is when you're advancing, just capture the rail that you want to actually use initially and prioritize it for repair by moving up your HQ closer to it. Number 5 is don't be afraid to pull back for resupplying. And this might sound obvious because this was constantly done in the real war, but don't be afraid to give up some of your grounds or to hold it, to bring in fresh units to hold it after a big advance. So we have this, and these guys aren't too bad right now, but say this motorized division here was at like 10% or 20%. He's almost depleted on his supply and fuel. That would be a good time for him to just get pulled back to this green area here where we have full rail connection and make sure that he's getting some supply in. Alternatively, we're going to discuss another option later, but you could fly in supplies to him. However, obviously there's some risks involved with that. But if you are trying to resupply an entire army, for example, or a corps and a half, it is probably less possible to air resupply it. So what you would want to do is advance to your point, hold it with some trash infantry that you could bring up. And then once the infantry is up, you can pull back your panzer divisions, resupply them, and then get their combat prep up and then attack again. So, and that's kind of how the Germans and the Soviets eventually used their supplies on the offensive. They would build up supplies, advance really far, halt, go on the defensive with their infantry, pull back a little bit, redo the cycle. So they would build up supplies, advance. That was how the war went. It was fits and starts. Don't expect to be able to constantly advance. And that's how this game is designed. It's designed for you to make a big advance, then stop, resupply, wait for your rail connections to get fixed, defend your flanks during all of this. So when you're stopped for resupply, you are on the defensive. Just because you still have the initiative doesn't mean that you're not technically, you could be vulnerable. So this is the most dangerous time for you, is when you have to do these halts for resupply, because that's when the enemy is going to want to counterattack you. So when you get to the front, stop, resupply, or fly in supplies, and then advance again. Number 6 is don't worry about supply while you're advancing. This is directly related to the last one. So when you're in these phases of advancing rapidly, don't worry about your supplies. Don't even turn a railhead. Don't ever turn this rail marker on. Don't worry about it. Just advance as far as your supplies will let you, as far as your combat prep and combat values will let you. So this guy's still got 50. He's only at 41. We can still keep going. We can hit a few more units, no problem. And in fact, that's what you have to do in this scenario, because you are going to lose the 4th Panzer Group on like turn 10 or 11 or something like that. They just disappear because historically they got reassigned to Army Group Center for use in some of the encirclements and later battles of September and eventually October. So this Panzer Group gets pulled from you in this scenario, which is super, super annoying, by the way. Probably my least favorite part of the scenario is Hitler's intervention. But it is a good illustration of situations where you don't want to worry about supplies. Let your guys just keep pushing. You know, if you are not completely depleted on them, just keep pushing if you think you can. If you can still win battles, just win them. So don't be overly concerned about your supply line when you're advancing. But also follow the previous tip, which was to advance and then halt when you get to the end of your supplies. Number 7 is try to co-locate your frontline supply dumps with airfields. And this will become vital if you are cut off for any reason, even temporarily cut off, or if you have a lot of rail that needs repair up to the point of your depots. So what you might be able to do is to capture something like a Pskov, which already has an airfield, get a depot into it, try to repair the airbase and the rail yard, and that might happen in some cases. A very forward depot and airfield might be faster to repair than repairing all of the rail up to it. And so then you can use the airfield to fly in supplies, because you will get better throughput from your air resupply if there's an airfield there. And this is kind of, it becomes very important in the Stalingrad scenario because you are advancing so far during Case Blue that you have a lot of rail repair to do. And so when you're at the very end of that, it is more efficient to just get new airfields and fly in some supplies to help continue your advance rather than waiting for all of the rail to get repaired. Number 8 is related to our previous discussion about advancing and pulling back for supplies. When supplies are low, and you know this because you can see it on your air turn. We're on our air turn right now. Notice how I don't have any planes up at the front. Don't fly planes into areas where they're not connected to rail. It's that simple. Just don't fly them in. You don't need them there for the most part. If they were so vitally important, then you could fly your longer range fighters, or if you absolutely had to, you could use bombers for close air support. But in general, just don't bring them all the way up to the front. You don't need them. Your Air Force is a tactical Air Force. It should be used as a breakthrough tool. And this is on both sides. It should be used as a breakthrough tool or a front holding tool. If your supply situation is okay and you're on the defensive, you can use your ground support to defend your own units. But if you are in a situation like this where Pskov is recently captured and you have these 2 airfields here, they will absolutely drain your supplies if you fly if you fly in an Air Force and then you're trying to air resupply your men, even if your stuff is set to 1, they will use any supply that's left over still. Unless, I guess, you could set your Air Force to a supply level of 0. That's the other option. I wouldn't recommend that either, because there's, in general, you probably have other places where you want to be flying missions still. So, just because you don't want to be flying missions at the front, it doesn't mean you want to halt your whole Air Force. Now, unfortunately, you can't set at the AOG or air group level the supply level, and I really wish you could. I wish that each AOG had a unit marker where you could set supplies. Unfortunately, you can't. So they inherit the supply priority from their parent unit. But there are a couple of options that you have available to you to kind of manage the airbase supplies. And one of them is to, one issue with this tip of not having planes at the front is that it'll take, once you decide you do want planes, it'll take longer to get them up and running because you don't have any ground units there. So one option is you could bring up your smallest possible size of like a very small air wing. What I really just wish they had is an AOG unit marker. I think that would be amazing. So if this thing had all the abilities of the Air Force, where you could set an individual supply priority for it, I think it would make sense personally. I mean, there's already so much detail in the game. What's a little bit more? But that would actually be a useful feature for the air war. If you just follow the rule of don't even fly them up there, then you will be perfectly fine. You won't have your supplies stolen by your Air Force. We are up to number 9 now, getting down to the end of it. The number 9, we've already kind of talked about it a lot, but use air resupply. Fly your air transport missions. You'll lose planes, of course, but the supplies on the Advance are extremely valuable. It lets you keep going in a place where you would otherwise have to stop. Let's execute our air directives, and I'll demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about here. Oh, geez. Apparently, I had flown a lot of missions the prior turn, so this is a perfect example of a situation where you probably don't want to be flying a ton of missions because you're incurring operational losses, probably from their supply scenario. They're probably a little undersupplied, or just running out of air miles because the missions are too far. So to manage your operational losses, you would want to follow some of these tips and tricks to keep them in supply. But I'm going to have a whole dedicated air war thing. I have a custom scenario I've been working on to teach people the air war. So stay tuned for that. So anyway, quickly demonstrate air transport. To use air transport, you hit F9. And this is, I have found a few bugs with air transport. So I'm just going to try to help you avoid said bugs. And one of the things to be aware of is you can only air resupply from areas where you have planes that can do air resupply. So if you have your guys on rest, they will not try to air resupply with those units. So you can still reset the rest setting by coming to your unit counter here. If you accidentally set your AOG to rest, you could always come to the unit counter and reset it at this level. And that would at least get you back on the road and let you start using stuff. So you could just click A and then reset your command. So say you were set it to rest. This means that you can't bring in any supplies through your air transport from this entire Air Force. And say you wanted to change your mind on that, you could just change it back to day and night. Or if you only want to fly day resupplies or only night resupplies, you would change that back, and you could do that not on the air turn. You could still change this stuff on the ground turn. So don't be afraid to do that. You might want to set them to rest for the entire air turn, but then still use them for ground support, for example. So you could turn them back off of rest and get them back to day and night. But now that they're on day and night, what you can do is air resupply. And you got to have enough air miles to do it. And you have to have enough supplies in the starting airbase. So by default, it'll try to do it from the closest airbase. But you can see here, my front line is so far from the nearest place that has supply, because Riga doesn't have supply. We don't have any supplies forward from Riga, so nothing at Valmiera. But if I was trying to air resupply something like Vilnius, or say I just wanted to drop supplies into these units, because this is closer and it has supply, they can do this mission. But they can't do a super long range mission like that. The closest place that has supply is Helsinki, and that is quite the long journey. So just be aware of, if you are trying to fly air supply, it is going to try to, by default, it will try to take it from the closest, in terms of air mile distance, the closest place that has supply and planes, that, and a working airfield and all that stuff. But it will try to fly in planes to do that mission. So the planes might not necessarily be located here, but they will be able to fly this mission because it's set as your staging base. But you can change the staging base. So say you wanted the supplies to come from Memel because this has more supplies than Ventspils. You could just click on any of these as long as they have a good freight number, say all the way back from Königsberg, because this is like your national supply source in this scenario. What you could do is you could fly it all the way from back there. But just be aware, is the further away your air mission is, the faster you're going to run out of air miles. So in general, the shortest one is probably best, because as long as it has a rail connection or a port connection, it'll get resupplied on its own. And for something like this, you're going to have plenty of supplies. And you can also leapfrog stuff, or you can kind of jump it up to the front. So you can fly the freight into here, right? So we're flying 63 tons into Riga, and it does not immediately get consumed. That's an important point. It only gets consumed on the logistics turn, or if you click the resupply airfield button. So if you fly supplies into your air resupply area, and then you click the button to resupply that airbase, it'll kind of screw you over, and you will get that supply sucked away by resupplying the airfield. See here, now we have 204 units of freight at Riga. So we could theoretically fly them from Riga to Valmiera, but the problem with that is we probably have the airbase still damaged, or we could have just run out of air miles. So you can move the same freight multiple times, but if you're, in this case also the target airbase is damaged, so we would get bad throughput anyway. But if for some reason you did want to move supplies all the way around, see how it's trying to take planes from all the way back here, and they just don't have enough air miles. So that's the issue here. But you might find somewhere closer to your supply source or to your Air Force that would be able to transport that freight. The other thing is, I usually set the mission to be single mission only. I know I just demonstrated it with multiple missions, but oftentimes you are maybe going to fly one mission into a frontline place, and then one mission into a place just behind it to supply the reinforcing units that are coming up. So I might fly one mission to Pskov, and then one mission to Riga to fill that supply that I took from Riga and gave it to Pskov. I would want to fill the stuff back up in Riga if it doesn't have a rail connection. In this case, Riga will have a rail and port connection relatively soon, so it's no big deal. But that's kind of the nitty gritty of air resupply. But the tip is actually just use it. Don't worry about losing planes doing it unless you're really short of planes. And then even then, you need the supplies to keep your forces moving. So unless you are in absolutely dire straits and completely out of planes, or you're in such terrible weather where you're going to incur unreasonable losses. If you have reasonable weather, like good, maybe in some cases fair if the situation's really desperate on the front, but if the weather is not horrible, just fly the missions. You'll maybe lose a plane a turn. It's no big deal. Just fly them. Don't worry about the number going down. Because just getting even 60 units of supply, if you have your supply priority set up properly, even just 60 units of supply might get somebody from, 100 supply up to like 110, 120. And just that little difference might give them enough combat prep or, get them back to a high enough supply level that they can go on the attack and make the situation at the front safer for your supplies to come up. So that's number 9. Number 10 is to use the priority repair button. So you see that the port here in Riga is on priority repair. You could tell it by the little star that is next to the damage marker. But here at Valmiera, it is not. So to initiate priority repairs, all you do is you click on the hex and then bring up the city marker and then click on initiate priority repairs. And it does cost 1 administrative point, but it is worth it. It does repair it a little quickly. Now be aware that it's also going to take supply to repair it faster. So you maybe don't want to do this again in places where you need the supply urgently up to the front. But if you have a damaged rail yard, it is massively reducing your throughput, and you should just be priority repairing it, even if you don't have supplies. You can fly them in, or just wait till the rest of the rail is connected to it. But at least by initiating the priority repairs is when it does have supply and it's passing its rolls, you can quickly repair it. Otherwise, some of these places can take an insanely long time. A port that is fully damaged still takes an insanely long time, even with priority repair on. But at least it gives you a fighting chance. So that's the 10 tips and tricks for logistics. I hope you found at least one of them useful, and give them a shot, even if you find that you don't particularly like one of them, just don't do it. But these are the tips and tricks that I've found to be very useful, and these are applicable to both Soviet and German strategies. But an expert level German player will probably tell you something completely different, because there are some very specific German strategies that revolve around particular rail lines or particular parts of the map where you have to break some of these rules, or the rules maybe just don't apply and you need other rules to follow. Of course, this is just a general overview guide, just meant to get you thinking more about, well, what do I want my doctrine of logistics control be? And to get you out of the weeds of thinking about the mechanics of, well, how is freight getting created? Don't worry about it. It's tonnage. It's moving from Berlin to the front. And the basics of, the priorities along the way is it goes from low numbers to high numbers. So it goes from 0 to 4. Overall message is to prioritize your ground units. Don't waste your supplies on your Air Force. And then to also prioritize protecting and repairing your railheads and ports. Till next time, see ya.